Unity in the face of aggression, a sentiment EU member states stressed over and over again when Russian troops first invaded Ukraine. But that unity developed cracks when it came to the specifics, how to punish Putin, how best to support Ukraine. Now, over 100 days into the war, the positions keep drifting apart, as Christine Mundwa reports.
Russia's new stated objective of taking control of Ukraine's industrial heartland is now within its reach. In the battle for the eastern Donbas region, Russia's armed forces are gaining ground. Some of Ukraine's best fighters are here, but for all their tactical skill and morale, they're simply outgunned. Away from the theater of the war, some observers say the tide could turn in Ukraine's favor if the West delivers heavy weapons to Ukraine quickly. But those calls are increasingly being met with both willingness and resistance among Ukraine's allies. The EU is split into camps, with some calling for more weapons for Ukraine and others wanting an immediate end to the fighting.
Ukraine must win this war. Putin must lose. That is the main message we have to send. And that's why now it's important to send all possible weapons to the Ukrainian friends.
We have to focus our efforts on diplomacy and bringing those warring parties back to the negotiating table. And I don't see how weapons help to contribute to this objective.
But one prominent diplomat argues it's not yet time for talks.
Meaningful peace negotiations will only be possible once both parties, and I insist on both parties, Ukraine and Russia, come to the conclusion that they can no longer make meaningful advances on the battlefield.
Right.
Are we at this moment now? No, we aren't. Obviously, Russia believes that they can still make meaningful further advances in the Donbas region. Obviously, Ukraine is absolutely determined not to let that happen.
Ukraine has vowed to fight Russia to the last inch over its sovereignty, but it's been suggested that when the negotiations do come about, Kyiv would ultimately have to cede territory. Beyond the land being fought over now, there are questions about Crimea, the peninsula Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014.
Given the fact that that Russia considers that now, since 2014, a part of Russian territory. And that would mean that we would be looking at a war not in Ukraine, but a war in Russian territory. And if you have a war on Russian territory, Russia could claim that existential issues are at stake, and we should do whatever we can to make sure that Ukraine can reconquer the territories lost since the 24th of February, as a minimum.
Bringing warring parties to peace is a complex process that can take a very long time. It is clear that over time, the unity and resolve in Europe and among Western allies will continue to deteriorate.
The European Commission chief, Ursula von der Leyen, is on a surprise visit to Kyiv. She's just wrapped up talks with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. They focused on Ukraine's bid to join the European Union. Kyiv submitted its membership application back in March. Brussels is set to publish its final assessment next week. Von der Leyen says the Commission is working all out to facilitate the process.
As you know, the Commission is currently preparing the recommendations, the so-called opinion, for the EU member states. We have been working day and night on this assessment, and I promised to you in April, dear Volodymyr, that we will be tirelessly working on it. So the discussions today will enable us to finalize our assessment by the end of next week.
Well, for more, let's go straight to Kyiv, where DW's Rebecca Ritters is standing by for us. Hello to you, Rebecca. So we just heard there from the EU Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen saying that the EU will respond to Ukraine's request for membership of the bloc by next week. So what exactly does that mean? I mean, aren't there still quite a few hurdles for Ukraine joining the European Union?
There are, Mariana, as you just said in your lead-in there, Ukraine applied for membership to the EU just 4 days after Russia invaded their country back in February. Now, of course, there are many hurdles. Back at that time, Ursula von der Leyen said that they'd considered the Ukraine to be one of them and they wanted to invite them into the fold, but that it would take time. And that is something that they will have likely continued in their discussions today. President Zelensky has been pushing for that to be fast-tracked, but, you know, there are many member states of the EU that worry that showing favourable treatment to Ukraine will get a lot of other countries who've been trying to get into the EU, their noses out of joint. Most notably in the Western Balkans, many countries there have been trying to join for some years now. We know that joining the EU does take many years from other states that have joined, years, even sometimes decades. So whilst, you know, there's a potential that this so-called fast-tracking may take place, it does look likely that all member states will accept and allow them to become applicants to their candidate status. They will vote in favour of that, but it's not necessarily meaning a real fast track because, as I just said, there are other countries, they have to get all 27 members to agree, and there are countries that are worried about showing favouritism to the UK, to Ukraine rather.
Rebecca, do stand by for just a minute. We will speak to you again shortly. But first, we'd like to look at another aspect to our coverage. Now, Zelensky warned that Russia poses a growing threat to international peace. He was speaking at a summit in Singapore, and he was calling on delegates there to resist Russian imperialism. Now, with the assault in Donbas showing no signs of letting up, Zelensky also renewed his appeals for heavy artillery. Let's have a listen.
A relentless barrage from Russian guns. As the battle for the Donbas grinds on, Ukraine has warned that Russia is preparing to widen its offensive. Now that Severodonetsk is almost completely under Russian control, Moscow appears to be closing in on the next key town in the region. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on preparing troops for an offensive against Slovyansk. But Donbas is not the only front line for Ukrainian defenders. Kyiv's troops in the south have warned they are running low on ammo, as Russian forces push towards the city of Mykolaiv. It was against this backdrop that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the world at the Shangri-La Security Summit in Singapore. There, he warned the future rules of the entire world are being decided on the battlefield of Ukraine. He called Russia's invasion a threat to international law and the cause of worldwide food shortages.
The shortage of foodstuffs will inexorably lead to political chaos, which could result in the falling of many governments and the ousting of many politicians. This is the direct consequences of Russia's actions.
At the same summit, the US Defense Secretary lashed out at Russia's disregard for international law.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is what happens when oppressors trample the rules that protect us all. It's what happens when big powers decide that their imperial appetites matter more than the rights of their peaceful neighbors.
Strong words. But for the soldiers on the ground, more concrete support will be necessary to fend off the Russian advance.
I can turn once again to our correspondent in Kiev, Rebecca Ritters. So, Rebecca, as we know, Ukrainian forces are fighting back Russian troops, mainly in the east and the south of the country. Can you bring us up to speed on the latest developments from the front lines?
Well, they certainly are trying, Mariana. As you heard, though, there in that report, they desperately need help in way of weapons and ammunition if they are going to continue to be able to hold back Russia's advance. I mean, the latest news isn't all that new, I have to say. It is becoming a very slow war of attrition with many losses, many casualties on both sides. Very slow movement, but Russia is making gains in that eastern city in Donbas, Severodonetsk. We've spoken about it a lot over the last couple of weeks. They have pushed forward. It is believed that they now have about 90% of that city, and they are trying to then advance to the sister city, Lysychansk, on the other side of a river that splits the two cities. They are having less luck with that, but they are trying to block some supply routes into there. But as you heard in that report as well, we're seeing counter-offensive in the south that are the Ukrainians trying, and with some success, slowly pushing back Russians' advance towards the city of Mykolaiv, pushing them back into the Kherson region. But it is, as that report really highlights, and as President Zelensky has been saying for some time, now we're hearing those calls get louder and louder. They need support by way of weapons. They're running out of ammunition and they are being outgunned by the Russians.
Well, speaking of weapons, there are some reports that Russia is using more deadly weapons. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we've been getting reports that Russia has started using these 1960s weapons that were traditionally used to destroy anti-aircraft carriers, but they can also be used on land with conventional warheads. They aren't as accurate as the more modern weapons and therefore cause a lot of casualty and catastrophe on land. Now, there are differing opinions as to why that's the case. Some saying that Russia are doing that tactically, others saying that, including the British Defence Department, actually are saying that they're doing that because they're running out of the more modern weaponry we've seen them using in this war so far. So that means that they too may be running out of weapons, but they do have a lot of these Soviet-era weapons that they will continue to use, obviously, but they aren't as accurate, so we could be seeing more casualties in this conflict going forward.
DW's Rebecca Ritters in Kiev. Rebecca, thanks so much for your reporting. Let's take a look now at some other developments in the war. U.S. President Joe Biden says Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky did not listen to warnings that Russia was planning to invade. Biden says Zelensky was among the leaders who thought U.S. intelligence was exaggerated. It's a rare change in tone from one of the Ukrainian leader's strongest supporters. The mayor of Mariupol has warned of a major cholera outbreak in the southern Ukrainian city. He says that with much of its infrastructure damaged or destroyed, people are drinking contaminated water. Russian troops took control of Mariupol last month after weeks of bombardment.